Okay, so glad you're back with us at Goldseek.com radio. Well, today's special guest, Dr. Stephen Leeb from TheCompleteInvestor.com and best-selling author. My featured guest today is a leading market prognosticator, Dr. Stephen Leeb, 25 years of investing experience, author of 6 books, including his latest bestseller, Flying Off the Shelves, Game Over, How You Can Prosper in a Shattered Economy. Welcome back, Dr. Leeb.
Oh, it's my pleasure as always. Thank you for having me.
I'd like to begin our discussion, if we could, please, with one of your best calls of 2010, Poor Man's Gold. You know, you said buy now, stunning potential. Well, everybody who took your advice has now doubled their money. And you also went on to say that silver could easily climb to $90 an ounce.
Okay, well, I didn't say that it would do it in the very near term. That's a longer-term prognostication. Take today, not just silver, as kind of a microcosm for what, I think is happening. The world awoke to the news, or at least the Western world awoke to the news this morning that China raised interest rates. There was a sell-off in copper. I think gold was down a little bit. I didn't see how silver opened. Most commodities were down, and now we're sitting here with only an hour and a half left in the day, and silver's up a full 3%, and not that far from its recent high of 31.27. Copper actually turned around and is up a little bit. Oil, which had been down, and when I talk about oil now, I don't talk about West Texas. I'm really talking about Brent. And Brent, as we speak, after being down about $1, is up about 77 cents to over 100. Commodities have a very, very strong bid. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And silver is certainly, I think, a commodity that has a reasonable chance of outperforming the others this year. Not a slam dunk as it was last year, but still, it has so much going for it. Gold, incidentally, if you allow me to segue, yesterday, I think yesterday's announcement from J.P. Morgan was really pivotal. I didn't see it in the financial sections today, but J.P. Morgan de facto is saying gold's a currency, and we'll accept it as collateral on loans. That's a big deal. That's a major deal. That's saying gold's a currency. We'd much rather have, we're willing to take gold rather than dollars. This is like not some small Chinese bank or somebody else talking. This is the largest American financial institution saying that they want, that they're willing to accept gold as currency. They also went on to add that they're, will in time accept other commodities, and of course that would include silver. Paper money is just getting bashed, and, for very good reasons. Obviously. And it's becoming worth less and less. And I think silver and gold are clear beneficiaries of that. Gold probably a little bit more of silver. But silver has that added kicker in that it's also an industrial metal. With virtually every economy other than, the poor food-stricken economies of northern Africa, and some other economies, poor economies, most economies in this world are growing pretty rapidly right now. One of the demands and growing uses for silver is in the alternative energy space, in particular solar, silicon. There's no way around it. If we're ever going to, create a new world, either because of resource scarcity or because of climate issues, silver is going to play a major role. It just continues to be a metal that, in addition to being very precious, you said poor man's gold, and that's a very legitimate title for it. But in addition to that, it's a metal that has some very special properties. It's the best thermal conductor, best conductor of heat among all the major metals, and it's the best electrical conductor. My goodness, it's a better electrical conductor than is copper. So, in a growing world in which dollars are becoming worth less and less, and stopping myself and listening to myself talk, there was a time when all I would say, buy stocks, great stocks, Berkshire Hathaway. I still like that. But you take what's in front of you. And what's in front of you is what's going on with paper currencies, growth in the economies of the world. And, silver's obviously way up there. Yes, it can go much, much higher. There's just no doubt about it. $90, I think eventually 90, 100 is a possibility. But I, don't want people to buy it expecting to see the year-end statements reflecting $90 silver. That's very unlikely to happen. Over the next 5 or 10 years, sure, very possible.
Very good news for our listeners. And segue here into copper. You mentioned that, and you have on recent shows. You've had some very lofty targets, and it has, well, frankly, done nothing but defy gravity here for quite some time. Are you still looking for big growth in copper?
Yeah, I mean, look, all these metals like copper, like silver, even gold, almost all the base metals are very, very special. I mean, there's really no substitutes for them. That means that in a world that's growing, any of these which have major uses, they're going to become scarce, and copper is certainly an example. I, frankly, have done the research, or I've done a lot of research in copper. There was a couple of big discoveries in Australia last year, but, big discoveries are becoming very, very few and far between. The grades that we're mining for copper now are going way down, which means the costs of mining are going way up. If you look at the amount of copper that's in the ground, in the lithosphere that's mineable, you can count as resources or reserves, and you calculate the amount of copper we're going to need over, let's say, the next 10 years. Or 15 years. I cannot connect the dots. I really can't. I don't see where we have enough. And I'm not trying to sound like an alarmist. I mean, some of this I'm getting from, a bunch of guys out of Yale University wrote a peer-reviewed article about 4 or 5 years ago and talked about, the limited, relative to the world's population and the emergence of these huge economies, namely China, but also India, et cetera. There are going to be a bunch of these metals where you're just not going to be able to connect the dots. Zinc is another one. And that means that silver, too, also becomes scarce because silver is a byproduct of a lot of these metals, including copper and zinc. I guess 2 points. One is, if silver is becoming scarce, if copper is becoming scarce, a lot of other things are going to become scarce, too, because you need these metals to drill for oil, among other things, to, transport iron ore from one spot to another spot. Everything is interconnected. So it's just hard to say that, you have a scarcity of silver or that you're at peak oil, whatever that means. But what you can say is that it's getting harder and harder to connect the dots. China has plans to urbanize 500 million people over the next, generation or so. How? They're aware of the problem. I mean, we're fighting a war in Afghanistan now, spending tens of billions of dollars, and they literally, as we speak, well, I don't know as we speak, but they literally are mining copper in Afghanistan, and probably as we speak. I mean, I don't know what time of day is there, so that's the only reason I said I'm not sure. But yes, they're mining copper. They've put tens of billions of dollars in infrastructure to mine, a very, very lucrative copper deposit right in the middle of all this turmoil that's going there. That picture of Chinese mining copper while we're, manning guns, speaks 1,000 words. I mean, we're maybe rightfully so, very worried about our safety vis-a-vis Afghanistan. But the Chinese are also concerned about their safety and their future. What we're doing and what they're doing, is in, stunning contrast.
The other poor man's gold.
I honestly would not be surprised at double-digit copper prices. I mean, again, probably sooner than you'll see $90 silver or $60 or $50 silver. I can imagine seeing $10 copper. It's tough to say. I mean, I think they're both in very, very strong uptrends. I think they both should do, extremely well. Copper, silver, zinc, for that matter. I think tin hit an all-time high today. And this is on the heels of what should have been a day in which these metals, rested. I mean, if you look at, and, my memory may not be perfect, but on previous days in which the Chinese have raised interest rates, and they're going to raise them a few more times. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I think you've seen a sell-off in the commodities. But you didn't see it. And you know what? Last Friday, when the stuff happened in Egypt, and the revolts in Egypt really took hold, the protests in Egypt took hold, copper actually managed to rally. There is such a strong bet on, strong economic growth and resource scarcity that it really takes a much more direct threat to the world's economic well-being than Egypt and the possible, overthrow of the Egyptian government to bring down these metals.
There is some talk about this zero backwardation in the silver market.
Yeah, I noticed that. I hadn't seen that.
As it turns out, these futures contracts going forward, every single one of them, at least recently, was lower than the current spot price, which doesn't really make logical sense unless there's more buyers currently than sellers. Clearly,
when you have a situation like this, especially in a market like silver, where you don't really expect industrial shortage, you don't expect present current shortages, because there is a precious metal element to it. And it's not just all industrial demand. I mean, copper, you can get shortages. I mean, if there's a mine strike, et cetera, yes, there might be shortages and you would see backwardation. Gold, I don't think I've ever seen it in gold, and I can't recall seeing it in silver before. But, a couple of things that, obviously have to enter your mind is that there may be a lot of industrial demand brewing out there. Silver may be being accumulated very aggressively for, solar panels, any number of industrial applications, as well as, investment demand. People, can't afford to shell out, $1,300 for a Kruger Rand, almost $1,400, so they're shelling out money for silver coins. And it's creating, a current, shortage. It's very, very unusual, very unusual.
Recently, Mike Maloney and Robert Kiyosaki produced an interesting movie here that focused on precious metals, but particularly on silver. They point out that you could take a cube of all the yellow metal above ground, place it roughly on a tennis court. All the silver could then fit on about half of that tennis court. And I think that's kind of a difficult concept, that there may actually be less silver above ground for investors than gold.
It's possible that there is less silver above ground than gold, but I think that, all things told, I think there is more silver in the world.
There is certainly roughly 10 to 16 times more silver than gold. But some other analysts have pointed out that silver tends to accumulate near the surface, whereas gold, as we see in those South African mines, has a tendency to accumulate, 2-3 miles even below ground.
Right, that's true.
So you might say, tapped the easy pickings, if you will, on silver.
Well, I think, silver as a standalone deposit, that's probably true. Gold, too, I mean, it's a byproduct of, but also copper, zinc, lead. You see very, very few dedicated silver mines out there.
Very good. Well, I also wanted to move on to another topic du jour that you've been talking about here, and that is the rare earths. You've called some of them as precious and even more so than gold. China controlling, of course, one of the world's largest supply of the rare earth metals. Well, we need these rare earths for, hybrid cars, electronics, oil refining, you name it, missiles.
Windmills. Well, this is the point, about the green revolution. There's no green revolution without the byproducts of the hydrocarbon era. You need oil to make windmills. There's just no way around it. And you need rare earth to make just a lot of different things, including the magnets in windmills. Vital in military application. Look, if you're particularly bearish on the world, and I'm not this bearish, but if you're particularly bearish on the world, you have to, see resource wars as a potential possibility. I'm not quite there yet, but it sure felt like the conflict that we saw over rare earths between China and Japan was pretty serious, to be very honest with you. It was pretty serious. And I think there's no doubt that China covets the South China Sea, the entire thing, because they believe there's a lot of rare earths under the, on the floor of that sea. It's a very, very big deal. I don't know whether it's a bigger deal than silver and copper, but it's way up there. And when you talk about refining capacity, there's very little of it. And I think the Chinese, as usual, I hate to say this, America is just standing by watching this stuff come about. But the Chinese, have seen this. They saw it probably 20 years ago. And if I can just segue into what the Chinese are doing, and how they think. The Chinese have three major banks. This was a wire story, I think, yesterday. One of these banks is actually only a few blocks from where I'm talking to you in New York, 48th and 5th. And I could actually walk over there. They're probably still open. And they will take dollars from you, and they'll convert them into yuan and just let the yuan sit there. They don't pay any interest. What they will tell you, evidently, they're extremely polite, very professional, and they'll tell you, no, you can't write checks on it, you can't do anything, but what you can do is watch your yuan appreciate versus the dollar. You combine that with the willingness of the Chinese to accumulate all commodities, not just silver, not just gold, but rare earths and everything else. And de facto, you have a currency that is really solidly backed by a lot of different commodities, much more so than anything that we can say about the dollar. This is happening, and I think there's these Chinese banks in the country. My guess is next year there might be 10, the year after 100. Who knows? Typical of China to just start this kind of thing very, very small, and the next thing you know, there's so many yuan in this country that we could start using it as our own currency. That, again, is far off. But it's indicative of what they see and how they see the world going. I mean, they see commodities as being, absolutely critical, not only to their own development, but critical if you want to have a currency that people really trust. It's going to have to be backed by either gold or other commodities.
I scan through thousands of stocks each weekend, and I can tell you that there's a growing trend, a theme here, and that is China. I see many of these smaller cap, mid cap companies starting to show signs of life following the 2008 credit crisis.